In this video, I'm going to teach you how to import assets in Python from one file to another. In order to understand this concept, we have to understand another concept known as relative paths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sketch here where I'm going to use some text boxes. This one is going to be called relative paths. And I just want to give you a simple example. So let's say that you have a folder called new. And in this folder, let's say you have access to a lot of different folders. Let's say within here, if we try to add some folders, let's say we have 2 folders in here. And let's say this first one is called version 1. And you can probably guess what the next one is. One second, let me just select this. And let me just copy that over. And over here, we'll go ahead and call this as version 2. So in each of these folders, let's say that you have some Python files. Let's say that in version 1, you have one Python file, which is called greet.py. Actually, let me just copy the version 1 and just copy it. That's easiest to work with. We call this as greet.py. And similarly with version 2, let's say that we have a Python file here, which is called execute.py. So as you can see here, we have one parent folder which has 2 subfolders, and each of these folders has a Python file. So now, what if we had a task where we need to use the contents of greet.py in order to run execute.py? Now, this is a very important concept. And okay, and so in order to make this work, what we need to do is we have to first replicate this structure. We have to create a project where we go into new, we go into version 1, and then we go into greet.py. And similarly, we also have to go to version 2 and then to execute.py. So let's see how this would all work out in Python. But the bottom line here, if there's one thing that you should take away from this before we get to the code, the concept that you should take from this is that everything is relative to a starting point. So if new is your starting point, then from new, you would have to go into version 1 first, and then you go to greet.py. And similarly, if you want to look at execute.py, you would have to start by looking at version 2. So we have a name for this starting point here. It's called the root. So essentially, whenever you open a project in Python, it is recommended to open it at the root, especially if you plan on importing assets from one file to another, even if their paths happen to be different. Now, let's say that if you didn't open a project at the root, would you be in trouble? Actually, you wouldn't be. There is a way you could still make things work, but it's a little bit more complicated. I'll share that method in this, possibly in this video, or I'll allude to it, and then in another video I'll describe it in more detail. But in this one, I will definitely show you how you can do it with just the root folder. Okay, so let's get started. So what we need to do now is we need to open a terminal. So if you're a Mac user, go ahead and either use your, what is this called? Spotlight, the Spotlight search. Or you can, if you already have a terminal icon down here, you can just click that. If you are a Windows user, you have a couple of options. You could use what we call as the command prompt. That's the terminal equivalent. However, the language interface of the command prompt is slightly different. You would be using DOS commands. But if you want to use bash-based commands, like the Linux-style based commands, then you would have to use a bash-like terminal. And so for Windows users, you have a great option, which is called git bash. Now, in order to get git bash, you might need to have Git as a technology installed on your machine. If you don't, feel free to leave a message to me in the Discord channel, which I'll share with you at the end of this video, and I'd be very happy to show you how to do that. All right, well, if you have git bash or you have your terminal, then feel free to have that open. And now what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to our desktop. So what we're going to do is we're going to say cd space desktop. And within our desktop, we're going to create a new project. So to create a new project, we have to first create a folder. So the folder name, we can set that up by doing mkdir, and then you specify with a space the name of the folder. So in this case, let's say we call this as Python asset transfer. All right, so that's what we're calling it. If you hit enter, right now you'll see that nothing really happened, but if you do go to your desktop, you'll see that a Python asset transfer folder is now there. So what we're going to do is we're going to go inside this folder by doing a cd and then space Python asset transfer. Okay, so now in this part, we need to enter a coding environment. Now we have a lot of different options available. We could be using Visual Studio Code. We could be using the Atom text editor. We could also be using Jupyter notebooks. Even if you want to go old school, we can use Emacs or Vim. But in this case, I'm going to be using Atom just to illustrate the concept. And if you want me to do this again in a different environment, I do take customized requests, so I'd be happy to accommodate you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Atom, and the way we can immediately invoke Atom from our terminal, if you have Atom installed, of course, is by doing Atom space and then a period. A period is basically a regular expression in Bash that says, I want to open everything at this current location. That's what that regular expression of a period means. So now if I hit enter, you'll see that I'm opening the Atom text editor. It shows on the bottom over here. And it actually moved to my other monitor, so I'm just going to drag it over here so you can see the window. And now you can see an interface like this, where on the left we have the folder name that says Python Asset Transfer. So now that we have that, if you're not familiar with Atom, I'm just going to quickly show you how we can get up and running with it. So all you have to do is where it says Python Asset Transfer, you can actually right-click on it, and there's an option to create another folder. So go ahead and do that. And for the folder name, go ahead and call it as new. And then within the new folder, you're going to have two subfolders. So we're going to do new folder, and you're going to type in version_1, and you're going to have another one, so make sure you're highlighting the new folder again, and do new folder, and we're going to call this version_2. You're going to have two different folders in here. Now, with each of these folders, you're going to have a different Python file. If we go back to our sketch, you'll see that version 1 has greet.py and version 2 has execute.py. So what we're going to do is we're going to replicate that exact same structure here. So we're going to say new file when we select version 1, and we're going to say greet.py. And then for version 2, we're going to say new file, and we're going to say execute.py. Okay, so now we have two different empty Python files that have been created in these two subfolders of the new folder. So now that we have done that, we are now ready to start writing some code. So what I'm going to do is inside the greet.py, it's really not going to be much. It's just a simple Python function that prints a message that says hello. That's really all it's about. But all I'm trying to show you is how we import stuff, right? So that's why we're doing this. I'm just going to say def, a defined statement, and I'm just going to put in the function name greet, and it doesn't take any arguments, so you can leave nothing inside the parentheses. And inside the scope of this greet function, we are just going to write a simple print statement which just says hello. And that's it. We just created our greet function. So anytime this function is run, it's just going to print hello. So all we have to do now is we just have to import this function into the execute.py. So now this is where the core of this video is going to be shown, where we have now created some code which has different assets that you want to import, and now it's just a matter of bringing them into another file. So to do that, we need to use the concept of the relative path, which was discussed. And so here's how you can write it in terms of Python syntax. So there is a nice keyword here called from. And so when we use the word from, we now just have to mention like what exactly is the file name. But in this case, it's not that simple, right? Because we know that greet.py is not in the exact same place as execute.py. So in order to make execute.py understand that greet is actually another file that's in this project, we need to find its relative path. So right now, what is our root if we're looking at this project? We might be tempted to say that new is our root, but the truth is that Python asset transfer is our root. The root folder is whenever you're opening your IDE, if it happens to be Atom or VS Code or whatever, the folder that you start with is always known as the root folder. So that means we not only have to go to version 1, but you also have to traverse through new in order to get to greet.py. So in order to set this up, all we have to do is just say from new, period, version 1, period, greet. Now, one really cool thing about these files here is you don't have to actually specify their extension. You can just say the name of the file and Python will understand what you're talking about. All you have to do is just specify what are you trying to get from the greet file. That should be pretty easy. So the way that we set it up is with another keyword, which we usually use for importing modules, is the import keyword. So once you type in import, now you specify the different assets that you're trying to get from this file. So in this case, we just want the greet function. So we could just say greet, just like that. So now that we managed to do this, all we have to do now is test out our code, right? So in order to see if this works, before we write anything else, let's actually save this. And I'm going to be using an execution environment within Atom known as Hydrogen. It connects with Jupyter notebooks. I would be happy to create another video to show you how to set it up. But in this case, just bear with me here, because in case you don't have that, I'm going to show you how we can also run this in the terminal using a Python environment. So I'll show you both ways so you can see how it works. All right, so let's look at this one here with Hydrogen. So the way it works is if you're using, it doesn't matter which operating system you use, Hydrogen works the same way. You just hold Shift and you press Enter, and you have different environments. So you just have to select the environment that has any packages that you use in Python. It might even have different versions of Python. For me, I use ChanR-Community. And so on there, as you can see, I get this check mark. And that check mark indicates that everything that I have done in that line of code is completely valid. There's 0 errors in that code. So that's why you know that the way that I've done this import is actually correct. So if that's indeed the case, let's actually try using the asset. The asset is the greet function, right? So all we have to do is, let's say on a different line, we just call it, just like this. So if you just say greet like this, you know that it's going to print hello. So why don't we go ahead and just try running it and see if it actually gives us hello. As you can see, it does. So this is how you can import assets from different Python files. Now, of course, you'll be thinking that, is it always going to be in this way? Like, if you were to run this exact same mechanism inside the Python environment in your terminal, would it actually work the same way? Now, that's a very interesting question, because whenever you're running code inside of your terminal, the paths that is being understood by Python actually changes a little bit. Within an IDE, the root folder is always the starting point to the path. But within the Python execution environment, it's actually not the root folder anymore. Instead, the Python file itself is the starting point to the path. So now things get a little bit more muddy, and you might be thinking, so how do you deal with that? Well, before we try to answer that question, let me just show you what's actually happening. So now let's actually go to the terminal, and within Python asset transfer, let's say that we wanted to run execute.py from here. So if you have Python installed, you can just type in Python, and now we just have to specify the path that goes to execute.py. So you would start with the new folder, and then if you press tab, it should give you a /, and then if you type in version 1, it will give you another /, and then lastly, we just need to type in execute.py, but here's a cool trick. Sorry, it's version 2, not version 1. And also, if you press tab here, you will actually see that execute.py shows up. The reason is because that's the only file that's inside this path. So our termini are smart in the sense where they realize that if there's only one element inside of a folder, if you press tab and you're trying to search for something, it will automatically pop it up. So if you press tab, you'll see execute.py here. So if you try running this, let's see what happens. So look at what it says. So as you can see in this traceback, it says that in file new version 2 execute.py, it says that there's no module named new. That presents a problem. And so we're now going to shift our focus to see how can we resolve this problem.